Welcome to the Lifestyle Builders Podcast, show 27. In our last episode, we talked money mindset with guest Heather Gray. In today's episode, we're chatting on all things money in your personal life with your spouse and kids. Welcome to the Lifestyle Builders Podcast, where we bring you real-life strategies on starting and growing a business and finding financial freedom without sacrificing the life you have with your loved ones. We are your hosts, Tom and Ariana Sylvester, and we are married, we're parents, and we're serial entrepreneurs. This podcast is for those who want more out of life. We'll show you how to take the vision you have and create the business that will help you achieve it. Join us as we share practical steps, real-life stories, and help you become a lifestyle builder. All right, we're back with another episode of the Money Month of May.
Wow.
Just decided, I like to break into spontaneous songs sometimes.
Yes, you do. Or even while you're working and you have your headphones in, you just break out in tune. I was working yesterday and I was like, oh my gosh, what is this?
I can't help it.
I know.
It just happens. Hey, talking about things that we can't help.
Uh-oh.
Let's talk about parents who can't help buying things for their children.
You mean grandparents?
No. Well, yes, them too, but that's kind of what they do. I'm talking about parents. I'm talking about a certain parent in particular.
Why do I feel like
I'm calling you out on something? I'm calling you out on something.
That's usually what you do.
Yep. I remember the days when you were traveling for work and you used to bring home a surprise every time you came home. So our, at the time, 2.5 to 3-year-old thought that every time Daddy came home, there should be a surprise in his suitcase.
Yeah, the unexpected, they should have been expected, but the side effects.
Yes.
So context, I was, at this point, I was traveling, I was doing business consulting, so I was traveling 4 days a week. And I don't even remember why, the first time I just came.
I think she was young. She was
yeah, she was
2.5, not quite, and she just missed you.
Yeah, well, and I'm never we don't do gifts.
No, we
right?
usually don't buy gifts.
So I'm never one to buy gifts, but I think I was in the airport one time and I was coming back, and they had a animal display, probably for parents like me.
Everyone knows those animal displays. They're the Beanie Boos.
The Beanie Boos,
they
right?
Have the
animals with the giant
sparkly eyes, and they're the cutest little things.
So I think I had stopped to get Red Bull or something, and I'm like, oh, these are cute, and I forget the first one I got her, but I'm like,
a monkey.
I bet Elena would like this.
Pretty sure it's a monkey.
And so I bought it, and I think I don't know if I put it in my coat pocket or my bag. And then what you guys used to do is every week you would come pick me up at the airport, which that was the best thing ever. I remember her waiting.
We had the waiting area had those huge windows that went around, so she was glued to the window.
Yep. And then she'd see me coming down and she'd go crazy. And as a father who had just been away from his family for 4 days, that was awesome. But yes, the unexpected consequences of that were then every week she thought I had something in my bag.
Yeah, because you started bringing them every week.
And at first I felt guilty, so I started bringing them every week.
Mm-hmm.
But then what I got into was I was like, well, let's make it sporadic.
Mm-hmm.
So then I started having it some weeks and not others. And, obviously she was sad, but, that was an opportunity, I think, to kind of teach her that, we don't always get these things. It's sometimes. And, I think that's hard for a lot of parents. But what we end up doing, even in a lot of the other stuff we do now, is that we teach them that.
Yeah.
So we teach them that they're not always going to get it, and they're sad at the moment, but I think it really helps them to learn some of these lessons early on that then lead to making it easier later in life.
We had to reset expectations. She had this one awesome thing that happened, and then it kept happening, and then she became used to it, and she started to expect it. And those, first of all, those little toys are not cheap. They're $7 a piece.
Oh, yeah, I know.
So,
I probably spent a couple $100.
Yeah, she has a lot of them because, of course, once it started, the trend just kept going, and people bought them for birthdays and Christmas, and randomly we would surprise her with one every once in a while. And it got to the point where we had 50 of them.
Oh, yeah, it was bad.
So this was definitely one of those things as a parent where we're like, oh, crap, what did we do? How do we change that? Because the last thing we wanted was for her to have that expectation of gifts
Yep.
Like, not just from us, from other people too, because I started to notice it when people would bring her things. She would start to expect it, and she would ask about it all the time. And I'm like, I don't want to raise a child who seems to be ungrateful because all she cares about is if you brought her a new surprise.
Yep.
She doesn't really remember, like, oh, you just brought her one last week. But also that she didn't understand that relationship with money. Like, those items cost money, and to keep buying them costs a lot of money. She didn't have any comprehension of that whatsoever.
Yeah, well, and one of the big things is it can be tough, right? When especially if you do something like that and you build that habit. But I'll tell you, it's so much easier to break that habit and kind of retrain some of those things when they're kids than it is later on in life. And, we all see like some kids that have never had some of that expectation reset, and then they struggle a lot more later on with life because they're expecting things rather than realizing that they've got to work for it.
Yep.
And that's a lot of our episode today is, right, just those relationships and those expectations around money with your family.
Yeah. Yeah, and let's kick it off with money and your spouse, because I remember when we were doing research for something, it was I want to say it was an older podcast episode. I think it was the biggest reason for couples arguing is money.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, it just about everything else in life ties back to that in some way, shape, or form. I mean, we spend the majority of our time at jobs or working, right? And why do we do that? For money, for then everything else. So like, where you live, the quality of your life, everything else kind of ties back to that. And, I think a lot of times, especially when you're early on, or if you got into some financial trouble, then it's kind of like oxygen, where it's like the only thing that you can think about because it has a facet in every part of your life.
Yep.
And
I think, what was it? The article that we were in, it was like talking about different money styles. So a lot of us end up with somebody in life, our spouse, our partner, and based on their history, their experiences, their different environment that they grew up in, we all end up having different money styles, different relationships with money. So when you bring two people together that have completely different relationships around money, that can cause a lot of tension in the relationship, because you're constantly like at war with each other, because one of you might think like saving money is the number one thing to do, and one of you might think spending money is the number one thing to do. So it's like it's how do you change your own relationship with money? How do you have conversations with your spouse about money without everything coming to an explosion and angry arguments? How do you begin to align yourselves onto the same page so that you can continue living your life and not always constantly be arguing about money, thinking about money, worrying about money?
Yep. Usually it starts with a glass of wine. Just kidding. But I mean, so I think you hit on a great point there. A lot of times what happens is that we'll do something, right? We'll spend money or we'll go into debt. And then typically our spouses get frustrated at the event. But what a lot of us don't do is we don't go deeper and say, why does that person have that behavior, or what is that belief that they have?
Well, we talked a little bit about that in the debt episode.
Yeah, and it all comes back to, I'm going to be like a psychiatrist now and like diving into like our childhoods and and all of that. But, so much of what we do today, I mean, obviously money's a piece of it, but a lot of times like your political views, your religious views, everything stems from, what you kind of grew up in as a child. And, whether it was your parents, your teachers, people that were around you, and those beliefs.
Yep.
And I forget the book. I think it was a Susie Orman book I was reading.
Probably.
And yeah, and this was like years ago. But one of the things that I think she had everybody do was kind of go back to your childhood and say, if you look at the things you're doing now, what money event, like if you think about money in your childhood, what stands out? And most of us have a time where it's like we were at the grocery stores and our parents didn't have enough money for the groceries, so they had to put something back. Or, they remember their parents would always just use a credit card. And so then if you look at the habits that we have today, usually it stems from those key events in our past that related to money.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you, I I was a child who never had to worry about money. My parents took very good care of me, of our family. I never needed for anything. I never wanted for anything. I didn't ask for a lot as a kid, but I think it's because I always was provided with things, so I didn't need to ask for a lot. But what that did was, because I was never included in the money conversations or even just had a healthy acknowledgement of what all of that was about, when I got to be an adult, I had no clue. And I was like starting at square one with learning how to deal with money, learning how to budget, learning how to pay for things, learning like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't go put this on a credit card because then I have to pay it all back. And I don't actually make that much. So how am I going to pay it back? And I never had to think about that. And I never even got a glimpse into that part of our lives. So I think that it set me back a little bit because I had to figure it all out. Luckily, I had somebody to help me because you and I met in college, and you had a completely different relationship with money in the sense that you were responsible for taking care of yourself.
Yeah, well, and so, yeah, if we look at my background, like growing up, we were kind of set. We had what we needed. Both my parents worked hard. We had a nice house and everything else, but we never had anything crazy. Like, I remember there's a couple times where, like, I remember one Christmas we got like a Nintendo and it was like the best thing ever. Or like when we got one of those giant trampolines, like when they first came out. So like we always appreciated like the things we had. But then, eventually my parents got divorced, and eventually I actually had like my own apartment. And like my senior year of college or high school, I had 3 jobs. And so I always had like side businesses and whatever. So I had a lot of a different relationship with money. But where I got into trouble wasn't even knowing the money part in my head. It was more of around, I'd say, my confidence in trying to make up for some insecurities. And I think that's what a lot of people run into. So I knew I had someone call me on this recently. They're like, Tom, how did you and Ariana get into all that debt when you were younger? You're smart. You went to college. You did this stuff on your own. How did you like not know that? And, my response was, well, in my head, I knew that. But guess what? We often don't make decisions with our head. We make decisions with our emotions. And when you feel inadequate, when you don't have confidence, a lot of times you'll make financial decisions or health decisions to try to make up for that rather than really understanding that and doing it in a healthy way.
Yeah. And I think you bring up a great point, because in our culture, in our society, there's this, we've got this weird transition going on right now from the expectations of who is supposed to provide in the family. And it used to be back in the day that the male, the husband, was responsible for providing. And the female, the wives, were supposed to be responsible for the childcare and taking care of the home. And that whole, 1950s stereotype that we've slowly, awkwardly been trying to transition out of for the last however many years. And I think we've come to this point where we have moved away from that a little bit, but the mentalities haven't completely moved away from it. So even though we're in a very equal relationship, I think a lot of men and fathers still have that mentality that they're solely responsible for taking care of their family. And that's something that seems very hard to break out of. And the same thing for women. Like, it's really hard. A lot of women struggle with like, oh, I have to choose my career or I have to choose my family, because traditionally women didn't get to have a career. There was only one choice. Now it's like, well, you can still be a mom and have a career, but there's a lot of struggle in how to make that work. And then you've got the other awkwardness with the female and the male, or female, male, whatever you prefer. But it's still a lot of like, okay, well, who's the provider in the family and who's the other? It's not so much that anymore. It's a lot of, we're all taking on all of the roles. So when it comes to the money, it makes things so much harder because everyone's involved, instead of, oh, well, I make the money, so I pay the bills. It isn't like that anymore. It's much more blended, and everyone's got to figure out their own way of how do we make this family work. And it's tough because you don't have like history to draw from. You don't have, a lot of us don't have role models that did that and were able to like watch them and then do that in our own relationships.
Yep.
So I think it's really hard for a lot of people to analyze their own relationships with money, talk to their spouse about it, and figure out a way that they can make it work in their family without money tearing everybody apart.
Yeah, I mean, you make a lot of great points there. And so a couple things, like we've helped a lot of people with kind of their personal finances. We've even done some like money interventions where, we were an outside third party that then helped people, couples like come together around that because, and we struggled with this too. Sometimes you're like, when there's something that is this important and you're trying to have the conversation, it's oftentimes difficult for you to facilitate it. So sometimes having an outside third party, I mean, this could be somebody you trust in your life. This could be a mentor, somebody you look up to. But having somebody else kind of help really mediate and guide the conversation then makes it easier for each person to kind of be a part of it. But, the other thing is, a lot of what we talked about so far has been the past and kind of how we got to this point. The other critical piece that we found is that setting those expectations and really getting clear on the future. Because a lot of our challenges in the past came from not setting expectations or not having discussions on what we wanted the future to look like, and then working backwards to say, okay, well, what are each of our roles in getting there?
Well, and I think talking about your future with your spouse and getting aligned on that can oftentimes give one or both of them the motivation to change what they're doing now. So it's tough when you're in debt and someone's like, oh, you should really try to get out of debt. Oh yeah, of course I should. Like, that's a given, but how do I do that? Like, you're telling me this like it's easy. But when you sit down and you talk about the life that you want to have and you talk about how you want to be able to provide for your kids and your family and create that happy, fulfilling lifestyle, you get that motivation for, okay, this is really possible. There's other people out there who have done this. There's people who were in more debt than we were and who were able to get out. So maybe we can get out of debt. Maybe we can do this. Maybe we can have the lives that we want. Then it turns into, okay, well, how do we do that? And actually taking steps to begin and start and say, okay, well, if we're going to get ourselves out of debt, we got to cut up all our credit cards and stop using them. Or, whatever your method is going to be, you get that inspiration to actually try and do that. And that's the hardest step. That's the first step. So once you get there, then, you have that reason of why you're doing it. And you can slowly but surely start down the path to getting yourselves in a better financial place. And I think part of that comes with getting more and more comfortable talking about it with your spouse, because it is an awkward conversation. Money is a very taboo subject in our society. You're not supposed to talk about it. You're not supposed to complain about it. You're not supposed to tell people how much you make or how much you don't make. Everything's kind of a bit of a vague picture, like, oh, well, so-and-so must have money because they have these things. That's not a given. They could just be in a lot of debt and have a lot of nice things.
Well, and that's the majority of it. But you hit on a key point there. We've all got to have a reason, whether it's getting out of debt, saving money for the future. And a lot of what we see, and I mean, we experienced ourselves, usually one person has something happen to them that gives them that reason, and then they just want to go all in.
Yep.
Like I'm a great example of that.
Yes, you are.
Something will happen to me, and I'm like, we're doing it. We're getting out of debt, and guess what? We're gonna cut everything else, and we're gonna do it in 6 weeks.
Yep. And then I come in and say, no.
But here's the challenge: is what I hadn't done in the past, and what we're so much better at now is helping you to find your own reason.
Yep.
Because like what so many people do is they do like what I did. Like, hey, we're going to get out of debt and we're going to cut all of our expenses and we're just going to put it all on debt. And you're like, hey, wait, what? That's going to completely change our life. Slow down. And then people like me see that as like you saying, no, we're not going to do it. But, what you've got to be doing is saying, how do I help my spouse find a reason that motivates them? And oftentimes it comes to not even talking about money, but talking about, what do we like out of what our life looks like now? What would we like it to be in the future? And then once we agree on that, it's so much easier than say, okay, what things should we keep doing?
Yeah.
And what things do we have to maybe change? So I always recommend, don't even actually start talking about money. Start talking about what do you like and what don't you like? Because once you get that agreement, then the how we're going to do it becomes much easier.
Well, and you got to be ready and willing to take the smaller steps. As you pointed out, you are often the go big or go home type of personality.
We're going to do this.
I am not so much that. So we've had to come together. You've got to like take it down a couple notches and bring it back a bit. And then I've got to step up and jump into that discomfort zone in order to hit the goals we want to hit and get where we want to get. But like I had to physically choose to do that. I had to mentally make the choice and say, okay, this is going to be hard, but I want the life that we want on the other side of it, so I'm going to do it anyways. And to be honest, a lot of people aren't ready to do that off the bat.
They aren't.
You've got to have a lot of conversations first. You have to have, they may have to have conversations with other people. As you said, sometimes they need to hear it from an outside source other than you. Your spouse does not always want to be told that they aren't allowed to buy things anymore. Like that's probably going to get you in some trouble. So you've got to find different ways to talk about it. You've got to find time when you're not stressed, when you're not angry, when you're going into it with a clear head.
Yep.
And talk about it then, because I know a lot of us will wait till like nighttime after the kids are in bed.
Yeah.
That's the worst time to talk about serious stuff when you both have a full day of work and you're tired and you just want to sit and relax, and your spouse comes down and says, oh, I think we need to start using a budget. You're going to be like, excuse me, what now?
Well, I was going to say, and so that's a great point. And one of the things that we've done and we've talked about extensively has been really scheduling those like quote unquote money dates. And I think one of the best things about that is that we say, hey, at this point, we're going to do these things.
Yep.
So it's not like, hey, right now at the end of a long day, let's do it. It's like we're both agreeing that a week out or, the last day of the month, whatever it is, we're going to get together and we're going to talk about these things. Mm-hmm. So now we both know it's coming. We can prepare for it. And then when we have those conversations, I find that it's so much easier because we're both ready.
Yep.
When you just try to, throw one of those conversations on somebody, it's a challenge. It makes you frustrated. They're usually not ready for it. And it turns into like, a struggle or a fight rather than when we're both ready for it and we can really have a good conversation.
Well, and I think we'll post the link to the article, but there was an actual article that talked about different strategies you can use to make your own money dates. Like some people like to make it a big deal and go out to a restaurant and have a nice dinner while they talk about their money and kind of take some of the stress off and expectations off of it. Some people like to do it at home and like set up a whole thing. I mean, it's all up to you. You do it however you need to, but making that time to talk about the serious things in your relationship is really smart across the board, whether it's about money or something else entirely.
Well, I was going to say, and when we talk about that, like you just hit on a really good point. People often look at like budgets or when they're trying to get in a better financial place, they always look at it as restricting and saying like, you can't buy that. You've got to stop doing your hobby. And it's not about that. Like what we found is, we talk about things that are on the table and off the table.
Yep.
So whatever's important to you, like, oftentimes when this comes up, like eating out or getting your daily coffee is something that people immediately say you got to cut. And some people are like, I really enjoy getting a coffee from whatever place a couple times a week. Mm-hmm. So it's like, if that's important to you, that's off the table. That's going to be part of the budget and you're going to allocate money. But what that then means is what are the other things that are on the table that we can cut? So some people really don't value living in like a big house or whatever else. So maybe they're going to spend less money on their house, but they really enjoy like their motorcycle and they're going to put money there. So this whole thing of doing like a budget and talking about these things isn't to say like, oh, we're going to cut all the fun out of our life and just like be money nerds. No, it's about really saying, okay, what do we enjoy and where do we want to put our money? And then with what's remaining, where do we want to make some of those decisions? Because, we're always, most people are going to want more than they have.
Yeah.
Whether it's more time traveling or whatever else. So it all comes to trade-offs, but having this conversation, make sure that you intentionally do it rather than just like, either getting into debt to support it, which hurts you later on, or makes you feel not happy because your money just kind of like goes away into all these little things instead of being in the important things that you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you talked a little bit about hurting you later on, and I think a lot of us don't want to burden our children with this stuff, but that is one of those things where not talking to them about money and not involving them in certain aspects of the family life or decisions of the family life also hurts them later on.
Oh, that's huge.
And that was something that it was kind of difficult to come to terms with. Like, everything as a parent is a struggle. Like, how do I talk about this? When do I introduce this to my kid? You know, we're all struggling with when's the right time to do certain things, and what are the things that we shouldn't be talking to them about, and what's appropriate, what's not appropriate. And money is one of the things that we decided we would include our kids in early. So we started having conversations early. And I don't know if this was due to the surprises in the suitcases, or if it was part of us being entrepreneurs and working from home and having that little bit of a struggle and a difference from other kids and their parents. But we started talking to our daughter pretty early about money, about saving money, about spending money, about making choices around money. I mean, she got, at one point, she had like $270 in her piggy bank.
It was crazy how
nuts.
much she was saving. Yeah.
And you know, she decided we don't buy them things. So if they need something, obviously we take care of our children. But when it comes to fun stuff like toys, we prefer to spend money on them having experiences. So we'll take them to the museum, we'll take them to the zoo, whatever. When it comes to buying actual toys and items that they want in the store, we started making them pay for them with their own money.
Yep.
So she has a little wallet. She has a little purse. She can decide which things she wants to bring, which day, and she'll put her money in if we go grocery shopping. And she knows, don't ask for a toy in the store unless you've brought your money with you and you're going to pay for it. Yep. So she started learning early on, like, oh, if I want something, I have to pay. I have to spend my money that I save to buy that. And then, as we predicted, she kept spending and kept buying things. And eventually she got to the point where she didn't have any money left. Mm-hmm. So she would ask and we'd say, well, do you have money? Well, I don't know. So we would count it and say, well, you only have, I don't know, $5 left. Oh. So she had to start thinking about like, oh, every time I spend my money, I'm taking away from what I have, which means I may not be able to buy what I want.
Yeah. And, you know, a big thing that, you know, I think we did was we didn't tell her no, but what we did was we walked her through options and scenarios and let her make decisions.
Yep.
So it's like, hey, you can buy this like $7 tiny LOL doll, you know. But
Parents,
if you,
who knows what those are?
I know. But if you do that, then you're not going to have money for this. So we would walk her through those different things. And I think what that has started to do is really help her think and make decisions. And then at the end of the day, like this is something I always do. I always put decisions back on people because people need to take accountability for that. Mm-hmm. So if she made a bunch of decisions to buy stuff and then doesn't have money to buy something else, then it's a talking point to say, well, how did you get to this scenario? Well, I bought all these things. Okay, well, if you want to buy this other thing, what do you got to do? Well, you know, I got to look for ways to make more money and whatever. But, you know, there's, I don't remember where I read it or probably watched it in a documentary, but like children, like they learn so much early on in life. Like, you know, I think it was like when kids are like 2 or 3, they can actually learn or understand like however many different languages. And then as you get older, it's difficult to learn those. So like, you know, I think what we've seen is that the more we talk to our kids about really everything, like this goes beyond money. Like we talk to them about death. We talk to them really about anything they ask.
Life.
And yeah, well, I mean, even recently, so we've been watching, and this is totally me. We've been watching like animal documentaries, and you know,
Discovery Channel shows.
Yeah, and one animal is like killing another animal.
Yep,
and so,
it was a Predator episode.
Predator, yep. And so you know, she was asking questions, and we were watching it together, and we were talking through it, and you know, and this is obviously our opinion, but I think the more open we are to talking about those things, the more I've seen like her ask questions,
make her own not assumptions, make her own connections between things.
Correct. Yeah. So, I mean, like, I think what we'll continue doing is just having these open and honest conversations. And then instead of telling her an answer, giving her the options and help guide her. Now, obviously, if something's really going to be bad, we're not going to let that happen. But what I find is that if you fail or if you run into some of those issues when they're small and they don't matter, you start to learn and understand how to make better decisions. And then you don't end up with bigger failures or bigger struggles later in life.
Well, and we've been open with her about, like, when we work and the money that we make working, what that goes to, what that pays for. So she knows that money pays for the house that we live in. Money pays for the electricity to have the lights on. Money pays for the heat so that our house is warm. Money pays for food. She goes grocery shopping with us, so she sees us go to the register, check out, and pay for the food. And she often will ask for things, and I will take that as a teaching moment to explain how, well, that costs money, and we have a budget that we only want to spend so much money at the grocery store, so we have to decide which things go on the list and which things don't. So, per se, if you want to get chocolate donuts, which is one of her favorite things ever, those little Hostess chocolate-covered donuts, then we might not be able to get something that we need on the list. Or we might have extra wiggle room because mommy did a great job on the shopping list this week, and we've got an extra $3. So, it's talking to them about real life, real-time situations, and not... not sheltering them from everything all the time.
Yeah, well,
they're resilient. They will figure things out. They will make the connections. Like, occasionally she will come over and say something that is just so mind-blowingly
absolutely,
like, deep, and I'm like, you're 6. Like, how did you figure that out? But I in all honesty, it's because we talk to her not as an adult, but we talk to her as a person. It's not, we don't shelter her from everything. We don't keep her from all of the scary stuff. Occasionally there are things you want to talk about, like why we don't talk to strangers in a store, and just different things like fires and how you would get out of your house if anything ever caught on fire, like all this life-saving or life-enhancing stuff that some kids may not get until they're older. And by that point, it's really hard to have them kind of like imprint with that information. Whereas now she's young enough that she's getting just little bits of these life lessons. We're not like, torturing her by trying to teach her all the time all these things that, adults should be dealing with. It's little things here and there, and she's picking them up and she's making her own connections. And the biggest one that we've found is talking to her about money and kind of giving her that beginning around how to spend it, how to save it.
Well, I was going to say, so we actually, if people missed it, we actually had an episode where we brought her on the podcast. It was a bonus episode, and you can get a link to that at the show notes page for this episode at tomandariana.com/27. But, she was a little bit nervous on there, and some of the questions were, a little bit kind of beyond her, but you'll get a little bit of her perspective on things. And then even something that happened this week, we've got this, rodeo at her school where they're doing, food trucks and a carnival and all this stuff. And so it's actually to support cancer, so they're donating all the proceeds. And so her and I were talking about that, and then she has some really insightful questions. She's like, well, I know it's good to donate things, but if they donate all the money they make, then how are they going to buy food? And isn't buying food important? So then we, had some conversations about, well, they all have jobs or they run their own businesses, but this was a thing that they're doing specifically to donate and help other people. So just I'm finding more and more these conversations are coming up because she's curious and she's putting the connections together rather than us having to push it on her, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, she does ask. She does ask us really good. She's your daughter because she asks really good questions. All right. So you mentioned this a little bit before when we were talking about the spouse and the partner relationship, money habits. This is one that's really tough for a lot of us because we are adults now, and it's really difficult to change habits that we've gotten used to over the span of our lifetime. So some of the things that I encourage people to think about and that I've thought about myself is, what is your relationship, or what are the habits that you have with money? So how do you spend it? If you're a saver, how do you save it? because I've seen people on both ends of the spectrum, right? Everyone knows somebody who spends all the money that they make and they just go, they can't help it. They buy. And then everyone knows someone on the other end of the spectrum where they're like the frugalist of the frugal people that you know, and they refuse to buy anything that they don't need, and they just save, and they have all this money saved up, and they live their entire lives with, they're living on like the most minimal amount, and they just keep saving. So I usually fall somewhere in the middle. I like to be able to do both when it's necessary. So obviously having savings is a really good idea because things happen in life and you don't want to have to go into a bad money situation because you didn't have money saved up to cover that. On the flip side, I don't spend a lot of money. I am not a huge shopper. I actually dislike shopping most of the time because I can never find things that I like, and it's very frustrating. I'll shop for kids' clothes any day, so Target is dangerous. But for myself and just like in general, I don't shop a lot. I don't spend that much money. You're very similar. So we tend to not be big spenders in the shopping arena. When it comes to technology, though, somebody likes to spend any amount of money depending on what technology piece he needs. Like we have a projector in our basement.
I think everybody listening would agree that a home theater in the house.
I didn't say it wasn't worth
awesome.
it. I just said that you like to spend money on technology, which is not a lie.
Well, I think this, no, absolutely, it's not a lie. But I think this is a good example. You make a good point. Usually, whenever, like, it doesn't matter what we're talking about. If you're on either extreme of a spectrum, usually it's not a good place to be.
Yep.
Usually you want to be somewhere in the middle, or not even on the extreme, but maybe a couple steps in. And this is a big thing that we preach, and even like why we have this podcast and everything we do, it's saying, you know, you want to have a good foundation, you know, financially and everything else. But this whole thought of like saving until your retirement age and then having fun, that's an extreme, and it's not a good one.
Yeah.
On the flip side, like YOLO,
spending all your money
and
when you're
living,
20.
yeah, and living crazy now and then having to pay for the rest of your life isn't good either.
Yeah.
So, I mean, even going back to our tagline, like your life, your business, your way, it's all about you designing that and then being able to fulfill it.
Yeah.
You know, and I look at, like, so if anyone's watching the video cast, one of our big things was I used to always be dressed up, right?
Yep.
And so it's interesting, some of the shifts that, like, I've made.
I brought him to the dark side.
You have. Some of the shifts I've made since, like, leaving a job, like, I'm legit just wearing, like, black shirts every day. Like, I have a cartoon character outfit now.
You do. You are the opposite of Homer.
Yeah, I know, I am.
T-shirt, and
but like
blue
for
jeans.
me, you know, there's obviously a lot of benefits to kind of simplifying things down. But one of the things for me was just because it doesn't matter like what clothes I wear. Mm-hmm. It makes shopping simpler. It makes a daily routine simpler. You know, so I think a lot of this really comes back to, you know, what's important to you, and then aligning that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's. Money habits are going to change over time. Some of us may not change very much and continue to have those same money habits throughout our lives. And then some of us make huge changes and go like a complete 180. But again, I like to fall somewhere in the middle of that.
And, you know, I think part of that, too, is whenever you have any sort of habit or something you do, just ask yourself why.
Yep.
And then, is your answer really in alignment with where you want to be or how you want to live or not? Like, so for example, if you're spending a lot of money in an area, ask why. Is it because you truly enjoy that and it's a good investment of your money? Or is it because your spouse is forcing you into it, or because you want other people to look at you a certain way? Which may be then opportunities to say, well, why is it that I feel that way? And is there something I can do so that I can be more comfortable with myself and make sure the decisions I'm making are in alignment?
Well, and I think looking at if those habits are helping you or harming you.
Yeah.
Like saving. Saving is not a bad habit. If you're saving to the extremes, that might be harming you a little bit because you're not living life. You're just saving. there are some things that can be harmful. Like if you spend, and you put yourself into a lot of debt and you put your family into a bad spot financially, that's obviously a habit that you want to shift. But it's looking at those habits too and saying, okay, well, is this habit hurting me? Or is it just something that I do and it's not harming anyone? It's just kind of there. Because there's a lot of us that have just random habits and do things because that's how we've always done them. But as long as it's not hurting you and your family, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just, okay, there's this thing that I do and I do it. All right. Now I know that.
Well, I was going to say, in talking about this, it's hard to change habits, but there's a really good book out there called The Power of Habits. And if you're looking to change a habit around money or really anything else, it's a good book to read to understand like why we do things. And then if you're looking to make a change, to understand what's a process that you can go through to help you with that.
Yeah. I want to shift over to another kind of topic around money. A lot of us, we talked about this in the debt episode a little bit. A lot of us are striving for more in some way. And this is often what tips people over to the entrepreneurial journey of, I want more. I want a different life than I have. I want more out of life than I currently have. So people are shifting into like entrepreneurship and building a business. Some people build a business around their passion. Some people build a business around the life they want to have by building that business. And I think it can really be a great way for you to shift the tides, and because you're making more money. But it's also a lot of what we talked about here, where you have to get a handle on your relationship with money. You have to get a handle on your habits with money, because just jumping into entrepreneurship isn't going to fix everything.
Nope.
It's going to carry over your money habits in your personal life into your business.
Yeah, and that's so important. We see it all the time where people maybe won't have a good handle on their personal finances, and then they start a business, and their business might be a really good business, but then their poor money habits then transition over there as well. But you bring up a great point. I mean, as kind of a culture and economy, there's a lot of shit like, 1 or 2 generations ago, you had one job, and
You had one job.
I knew you were gonna say that. But you had one job for 40 years, and then you retired, and then that's kind of shifted. And the average number of jobs that people have nowadays is a lot more.
I'm a testament to that.
Yeah, I mean, people tend to shift jobs, I think, like every 1 to 3 years is some of the studies. But we're even shifting away from, traditional employment to more people freelancing, more people contracting. And, oftentimes people think that, well, if I want to make more money, I'm just going to get a second job. But one of the challenges around that is typically it's harder to get a second job that pays you what you want. And then even like I remember back to our episode with Dustin Heiner when he was talking about, he was trying different things and all the money that was taken out of his paycheck. And he's like, you know what? There had to be a better way where I had more control. And he had some great quotes in there. So if you guys missed that, we'll have a link on the show notes. But he talked about how he was able to leave his job through real estate investing.
Yep.
And, whether that's the path you go down or something else, there's more and more people that are doing this quote unquote side hustle. Even if you want to keep your job, what that side hustle does is it brings you in more money to then help everything else, to pay off debt, to put more in savings,
to take more family vacations.
Yeah, to do the things that you want. And then if you do want to start a business, that's one of the best ways to do it is start it on the side. And then, you still have the stability of your job and that income coming in, but then it gives you some leeway to build that business, kind of get all the pieces worked out. So then eventually, if you do want to leave your job, you've kind of done it in a smart way, rather than putting all the pressure on if you just kind of quit your job and then you got to make your business work.
Yeah, and we are going to dive more into money in your business in one of our next episodes in our money month of May. So be sure to tune into that one, because we're going to just be talking all about business relationships with money and investing and funding and all of that sort of stuff, running your business. How do you deal with the money? So definitely tune into that. But I want to jump to the homework section. My homework for everyone today is going to be to schedule some money dates with your spouse. So take a look at the article that we mentioned. We'll put it up in the show notes, and put those money dates on your calendar. I want them inked, solid.
Yeah, well, once you put things in your calendar, you're more likely to do them.
Yep.
Which is why we have everything on our calendar. So my homework for this week is I want you to just start being a little more conscious of what your money habits are. So, when you spend money, when you save money, just start thinking a little bit more about like why you do what you do, and ask that question, why? If you go to a store every week, or if you buy coffee, or if you decide you're not going to do something, you're going to save it, just start thinking about why you do those things, and you're going to get a better understanding of what your views and habits are around money, which is obviously a precursor to a lot of this.
Yeah, and if you are interested in just reading a little bit more about kind of setting some of your finances up, especially if you're somebody who's looking to build a business to leave your job, check out our blog post called Find Your Freedom. We will put the link to that in the show notes page. But we talk a lot about just in your personal finances and leading up to kind of how you can set all of those things up so that as you build your business, you can kind of prepare yourself and your family financially to leave your job if that's your goal.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. What's your books? We have 2 books for today. You can do a book and I'll do a book.
All right, perfect. So actually, you just talked about the Find Your Freedom article. If you go to that article, there's actually a video in there. David Bach, if you guys have heard our story, the first book I read was The Automatic Millionaire, and really changed my perspective on a lot of things. And I actually, in that article, I put a video where I got to thank him publicly at a conference we were at, which was pretty cool. And so speaking of David, the book that I have for today is called Smart Couples Finish Rich: 9 Steps to Creating a Rich Future for You and Your Partner. So it's by David Bach, and where The Automatic Millionaire was more around mindset and then kind of saving money. Obviously, doing that with a spouse is different. And so he actually just re-released this book with an updated version. And a lot of what it talks about is the stuff we've talked about here, how you get on the same page, how you look at some of your money habits, and then how you really build a smart future together as a couple. And a lot of, your personal finance books don't go into the couple side of things.
Yep.
So this is a really good one around family and couples and money and all of that.
All right. And one of the ways that this was actually, funny enough, this was a surprise that Daddy brought home in a suitcase.
There we go. Now I'm bringing money book surprises home.
He went to a conference, a financial conference, FinCon, and there was somebody there that they created this book, and it's a book for kids, but it's kind of like an introductory, a fun way to talk about the different things that money relates to, but with your kids and in the alphabet. So it's called Money A to Z by
Scott Allen Turner.
Thank you. And actually, all of their profits from this book go to charity, which is amazing. So we'll put up a link to this one as well so you can check it out. But our kids loved this book. It went through a lot of different terms that you use when talking about money. It went through a lot of different ways that money is used, whether it's giving, helping, jobs, inventing, price on things. What does price mean? Value.
Talked about wants and needs, which was a big thing.
Yeah, so this was a really good book. It opened up a lot of conversations between us and the kids by talking about like, oh, well, what does it mean? Or why are they giving money or giving things? So if you want to start getting your younger kids into some of those early money conversations, and this one is good for all ages since, after all, it is the alphabet. This is a really good way to kind of open that door and get them used to talking about it and asking questions and things like that.
Yeah, our kids were hooked on this book for like a month.
Yeah, I think we read it for like a month straight.
Yeah, and what was cool, like kind of closing all this together, there were several times where the kids would reference back, oh, this is like Jay in the money book. So they would start to then think about the things that were happening in real life and tie it back, which was cool.
Yeah, all right. It has been another great episode with Tom and Ariana, your hosts and lifestyle builders.
And as always, especially after our conversation today, it's your life, your business, your way, and we'll see you next time.
Bye. Are you frustrated by a lack of momentum in your business? Do you want real-time guidance and support from seasoned entrepreneurs who really care about your results? If you're nodding your head or awkwardly shouting yes in public somewhere, then we invite you to join Lifestyle Builders, a mentorship program designed to meet you where you are and give you strategic and custom guidance so you can build the business you need for the life you crave. You can find out more at joinlifestylebuilders.com.
Your life, your business, your way. Join Family Entrepreneur Life. Join Family Entrepreneur